like a river attended my way. When sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever, my Lord, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Your Excellency, Most Reverend Godfrey will be called now Father Bishop. For the first time in the history of Nsukka Diocese, to the best of my knowledge, anyị na-eli Father Nabo at the same time. Father Bishop, anyị amago na onye ọkwa shiri n'ụkwụ ali ahụ elie na chahu. Ma anyị amago na onwe onye etiri ga-etiri mgbada. Imi ga-afụ gị by force. Mana onye siri nwatakịrị were ka jide nke akwụje ka ihe m je kweka. Your Excellency, Most Reverend Stevie Sionaga, our affectionate brother and our good friend. Your Excellency, the Deputy Governor of Enugu State, Barry Stefano Osai, Nende Nochenya na government, ndị monsi nọ na ndị fadi bem ka njishe n'ike nọrọ n'ekpere. Ndị brother na ndị sister, ndị St. Mary's Parish Abonyi ngwuru Nsukka, ndị Obudule Kenye, na St. James Parish Owerri Zoba bebe Father Johnmartins jefota. Ndị St. Patrick's Parish Amuogwako, na St. Patrick's Parish Idiopi, na ndị Ibe Gama n'Umuolo, ebe nwana anyị nwoke Father Ferdinand si wefota. Ndị nke Chukwu niile gbakọbara ọnụ ebe a. May the name of the Lord be blessed both now and forever. This song, It Is Well With My Soul, was composed by Horatio Spafford, a Presbyterian elder in Chicago, United States of America, who was also a very close friend of the reputed evangelist Dwight L. Moody. Like the Job of the Old Testament Bible, tragedies visited the happy family of Horatio Spafford in droves and in great measures. For instance, in 1870, his 4-year-old son, Horatio Jr., suddenly died of scarlet fever. A year later, in 1871, Horatio Gates Spafford suffered a great financial loss in Chicago fire, which devastated the entire city and ruined much of the property investment of Horatio Spafford. But besides this, there were worse trials that were ahead of this family. That was the sea disaster. In 1873, just 3 years after the death of his son Horatio Jr., Horatio planned to travel to Europe with his wife Anna and their 4 daughters. And so he sent his wife. However, he himself was delayed by business obligation. And so he sent his wife and 4 daughters ahead of him on a French steamship, Ville du Havre. Tragically, dear friends, the ship collided with another vessel and sank rapidly into the deepest part of Atlantic Ocean. And within 12 minutes of that unfortunate incident, which claimed the lives of over 300 crew members, including the 4 daughters of Spafford, there was this incident. Anna, the wife of Horatio Spafford, survived that collision and departed to Wales. When she reached Wales, she telegraphed her husband in these remarkable words that have been etched in history. Saved alone, but one. What shall I do? On reading this devastating and horrifying message, Horatio immediately set sail to his grieving wife. As his ship traversed the very spot of that tragedy, the captain of his ship informed him that they were now crossing the very spot of the tragedy where his daughters perished. Horatio, in an emotion-laden tears, penned down this song. When peace like a river attended my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Umunemne Christi, all of us gathered here will agree with me that our Father Bishop and the rest of us in Nsukka Diocesan Presbyterium have experienced series and chains of terrible disaster of irreparable magnitude this singular year, 2025. And I am not even sure whether it has ended this year, because we have not come to the end of this year. Manai na ryo Chukwu, herere huru no bege banyo ozo. On the 21st of March, 2025, we lost our very senior colleague and a personal friend of our bishop, Reverend Father Dr. Sunday Okwo, in a circumstance so painful and surprising to all of us. And as we are trying to recover from the shock of the death of Father Okwo, this death struck again on the 2nd of July, 2025, and ferreted an inspiring and saintly priest, Reverend Father Edward Okeke, who was barely 4 years in his priesthood. We were all taken unawares as the most shocking news of this incredibly surprising death of the energetical, implosive, and explosive Reverend Father Dr. Johnmartins Chikani began to fill and spoil the air in great disbelief, like the doomsday Superman. Okoman, the distinguished headmaster, had again been brought down by death. This was where we were, still wriggling in pain of confusion and in our collective pain, not knowing that another death had increased our sorrows. Because on the 26th of August, 2025, this death struck harder and killed our Emil brother, a simple and humble colleague of ours, Father Ferdinand Abonyi, lying side by side with our brother, Father Johnmartins, in this funeral mass. While we were still reeling in these shocks, another death struck that shook the precincts of Nsukka Diocese and beyond. Most Reverend Francis Emmanuel Bono Kobo, the first bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Nsukka, the indefatigable soldier of Christ, this foundation layer and workaholic bishop, passed on to glory. The three of them lay side by side in our mortuary here, and they are just separated by this event of today. As we are gathered together today, my dear brothers, for this final rite of Father Dr. Johnmartins Chikani and Ferdinand Abonyi, there are obvious questions begging for an answer, which include how, where, and when shall it be our turn to die? As we think about this, my dear brothers and sisters, I invite you to to reflect with me on a theme, Ineche Noge Kade. Do you think there is still much time left at your disposal? My beloved brothers and sisters, on any time in the history of my priesthood, in the recent time, I sat down one evening and began to reel out the names of our brothers who became the casualties of death. I saw myself losing sleep at night. During one of those nights of insomnia and great fear, I decided to take some precautionary measures, one of which was Nagamekura Murenyana. Because na chogm kenshine urad deep transcenda to death. The second one, nsi na ebe ọ na this song na abiazi like this. Na another thing ga-eme bụ na mkpọchichere ụzọ ndị ọzọ na amaha my room open. Ka enye anybody pain ivere anyu na Monday hammer tirigide the door of the presbyterium. But something unique happened that night. Gemu wore ishim to question a pillow. We decide na mekuru angwere. And na makpochi my door. When we knew that time mukurura like that night. Nkebuna when I woke up in the morning, I hurriedly went to celebrate my morning mass that very day. And na human memory the too short. Chose to make me return to my normal life. No gab mobu na chineji gabun ponwa munka enjoy ya ekpochigo gate ekpochigo nka pochi nka. Because when I was afraid of that, it did not come. And it has not visited me. But I am sure that one day, maybe not too far from now, this death may come upon me. I know that many of us may have lived with these same thoughts of mine and the phobia of death. But the question is, can our fear change the course of events in our lives and prevent us from dying if our time of death has actually come? It wouldn't. Do we have the power to predict our death, such as how, where, and when we shall die, when this mystery called death will come to knock at our doors? Of course, certainly not. But why this fear? And what is in this death that have become the terror and our nightmares? Catechism ke Catholic Church gwara anyị na ọnwụ bụ nniri, mkpụrụ obi na-eniri na arụ. Gwakwa anyị na ekpe anyị ga-anwụ, arụ anyị ga-eru ure, mkpụrụ obi anyị ga-eje n'iru Chukwu ka ekpe ikpe. Hebrews chapter 9 verse 27. The fact of having to face the omnipotent and omniscient God for judgment immediately after we have died could also be a considerable fact why we are afraid of accepting that death is very close. Because we would like to continue living the way we are living. So that chezo judgment. Mana, one of our great thinkers reminded us that no one wants to die. Even those who want to die do not want to die in order to go to heaven. And yet, that is a destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is what it should be. Because that is very likely the single best invention of life. It is life's change agent. It clears the old to make way for the new. Right now, all of us gathered here are the new. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Onye kwuru ha bụ Steve Jobs, an American entrepreneur, an inventor, a business magnate and the man who co-founded the Apple Incorporated. Another ancient Greek philosopher, Epicurus, who founded the Epicurean school of philosophy, reminded us that it is possible to provide security against all ills. But as far as that is concerned, women live in a city without walls. And the world-famous British contemporary artist, entrepreneur, and art collector, Damien Stephen Hirst, speaking about the general fear human beings entertain because of that, had this to say: I was taught to confront the things I cannot avoid. That is one of those things. To live in a society where you are not trying to look at it is stupid, because looking at that throws us back into life with more vigor and energy. The fact that flowers do not last forever makes them beautiful. We need to face death with real courage, my dear brothers. But this may not be totally plausible, because certain facts show that every human being most of the time approach death with trepidation, because we fear the unknown. Death is an enigma, a mystery which none of us have lived through and returned alive, except Christ, who shows us hope. We fear that and every other thing we cannot understand fully. What lies beyond, what the moment of dying feels like, and what comes after it. The fear of separation from our loved ones can also be the reason why we are afraid of dying. Because death separates us from our families, friends, and all we have known and loved. Death feels like tearing us away from the life we are attached to. Even Jesus himself wept at the death of his friend Lazarus in John chapter 11, verse 35, showing us that this separation is deeply painful. There can also be the issue of the pain of losing control. In life, we plan, we organize and manage human beings and resources. But in death, we surrender everything. Our possessions, status, power, and even our bodies. For human beings who love control, this total surrender can be frightening and torturing. I hope that all of us remember the roles of King Herod the Great, who as a king with terrible obsession and explicable paranoia about succession, eliminated anyone he suspected of threatening his throne. Herod killed several of his sons, including Alexander, Aristobulus, and Antipater, because he feared that they might replace him forcefully. Herod also executed his wife, Marin, who was the princess of Hasmonean, and her relatives for the same reason. The biblical account of St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2, verse 16, says it all. Makana, ga Herod warunti anumano nwere king of the Jews nwuru amuru o we si ka ojuta ebe a ga-anọ wee mụ ya. Ihe ọ chọrọ ime bụ na ọ chọrọ igbu checheche ụmụ nwoke niile dị 2 years and below. Kekwe ogbue the Christ child. Onye a na-eche na ọ ga-abụ ya bụ eze ndị Jew. I think asị kwube na Herod kwesịrị ịbụ onye Nigeria. Maka na unu mara ihe na-eme na Nigeria. We are also afraid of losing control. And anybody who threatens you to lose your control, unu amaghị ha na-eme na banyị. Ọ bụrụ oge election, mega ahụmanụ dị popular na igote ndị ji agbagbu ya ma ọ bụ kidnap ya. The fear of judgment could so terrify us to the point of thinking that we have still longer time to live on earth, which death should not interrupt until we are ready to die and appear before God in his judgment. However, deep in our heart, we know we are accountable to God for all our omissions and commissions. Our conscience reminds us of our sins, our failures, and unfulfilled duties, and the impending judgment soon after death. And we still dismiss the thought of having to die anytime soon as not realizable. Maniha ineche abrihe Chineke neche. Maka na ogwara anyị, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. Isaiah 55 verses 8 to 9. And the recent deaths of our brothers in this diocese should remind all of us, especially my dear brother priests, that no one is immune from death. And the hour of death is not known to anybody. And we really need to pray for ourselves. The book of Job reminds us also that man's days are numbered and determined, and God has decreed our days, which we cannot exceed. Job 14:6. And the book of Ecclesiastes reminds us time for everything on earth. Time for giving birth, time for dying, time for planting, and time for fruiting what has been planted. A time for killing and a time for healing. A time for tears and a time for laughter. A time for war and a time for peace. Time, as all of us know, is one of the most precious and mysterious realities of human life. It is God's gift to us, yet it is limited. Time is life itself. When you waste time, you waste life. When you appreciate the essence of time and use it well, your time becomes both meaningful and productive. Human life is measured in time, and how we use it shows our values, and time is universal. Each and every one of us, whether educated or illiterate, whether male or female, whether rich or poor, we are given the same 24 hours each passing day. But the question is, what are you doing with your own time? What are your priorities in life and values of life, knowing that one day we shall be left alone and will not be able to predict when we shall die or when the roll call shall stand for us on the yonder. Our Lord warns us to be on the alert, that we ought to stay awake because we do not know when the hour comes, when the Son of Man will come. Matthew 24 verses 42 to 46 and Luke chapter 12 verses 39 to 40. St. Paul warns us further about times and days, brothers. I do not write to you about this, but remember that the Lord will come like a thief in the night. That is how it will come. And that is how it came upon our brothers. And the Lord himself again reminded us in Luke chapter 12 verses 13 to 21 that there was a man that was a fool. Why? The rich man or the rich fool said to himself, I am the author of my life and my goods are mine. He wrote God out of his life and separated himself from God, who said, through the words of St. Paul, that those who are rich in the present age should also be rich in sharing to others. That is 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 to 18. When we do the will of God and be on the alert of his coming, the cause of destruction will be abolished for us. And the throne of God and of the Lamb will be ours. And then we who are his servants and who obeyed him will worship him day and night. When you reference Revelation 22 verse 3 to 5, or see, they will see the Lord face to face, and his name will be written on their foreheads. It will never be again. They will not need lamplight or sunlight, because the Lord God will be shining on them forever and ever. Therefore, let us seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Matthew 6:33. That is like a thief. Not just because it comes in great surprise, but especially because it gives one the feeling of regret. And its compounding had I known. Obonamma. Nemgejege ba. Onye atiyem na trouble. Obonamma. Namake memi hanwa. Asise mene. That's what we say all the time. And then we remain there and begin to think that this death will not come, but it will come. This comparison about death is appropriate here. But I do not want to pull it too far. Jesus was here referring to the suddenness of his coming. Perhaps he was also referring to the speed of its execution. Or perhaps still, Jesus was referring to its unexpected and unforeseen characteristics. My dear friends, those ominous days of the demise of these our brother priests, the amiable and simple brother, the affable brother, Reverend Father Ferdinand, Emeze Abonyi, and then the man many regard as Colossus, Reverend Father Dr. Johnmartins Chikani. Shall we say that this death came and robbed us of these great men? Did this inevitable death sneak in and surreptitiously and stealthily take them away from us? I personally do not think so, because while Reverend Father Johnmartins Chikani is my own brother and very close to me, Reverend Father Ferdinand Abonyi was my student at Sacred Heart Seminary in Sude, and also a very close friend of mine. And I have interacted with both very closely. And I can bear this testimony that both of them we are always prepared to face this enigma called death. There is this old song entitled, "Still Away to Jesus." It was a Negro spiritual song composed in 1800s by Negro slaves who wanted to run away from the yoke of slavery. The lyrics of this song says, still away to Jesus, still away home. I haven't got longer to stay. These our brother priests. We are real brave men in all ramifications proper to their capacity, and had prayed to depart from this world in gratitude without being diminished by too much troubles of this world. I am sure that they had prayed for God to spare them from the enslavement of this material world. They prayed to be spared of long and protracted impairments and sicknesses of all kinds. Our brothers prayed God to spare them from the vicissitudes, the pains, the trauma, and the enslavement of tubes and oxygens, the beds and the wheelchairs, and the embarrassment of sterilized food, the cell and the jail which our relatives and friends sometimes wish to build for us in the course of the happenstance of being ferreted by persistently terminal sickness for the rest of their lives. God was indeed present with them and good for them. Father Ferdinand Abonyi and Father Johnmartins Chikani. I can say God answered their prayers. And I know that Jesus Christ, whom they have faithfully served, is always better than even thousands of well-meaningful friends and relatives who would like us to hang on to life at all costs. And so our brothers and fathers, Johnmartins and Chikani left this stage of life at the peak of the ovation. They stole away to Jesus. They stole away home. They did not get to stay too long and continue gnashing their teeth, looking out for friends and colleagues who visited them in their hospital beds or who did not visit them, or get disappointment because no one came around to carry away their mess at such critical times of battle for survival. Rather, as heroes of all times, Father Johnmartins and Father Ferdinand Abonyi went away quietly and boldly bowed out. And like soldiers of Christ, they smiled away to Jesus, their all and all. The amicable and gentle Father Ferdinand departed to his Creator, and the impeccable Okoman, the headmaster, par excellence, was stolen away to his ultimate master, Jesus. I want to say something about Father Ferdinand. This young priest, Father Ferdinand, as I said, is my friend. Michael Bassey Johnson, a Nigerian actor, a poet, and a philosopher, says, life begins as a dream, becomes a little real, and ends as a dream. The beauty of that is that it begins a story of life and offers others the opportunity to either choose to live life worthy of emulation, full of legacies, or live in such a way that will utterly diminish their ever having existed, or permanently erase their personality and drop their names into oblivion and dustbin of history. This highly generous and most approachable priest, Reverend Father Ferdinand Abonyi, was born on the 30th of January, 1970, in which he narrowly and joyfully escaped the crushing and debilitating effect of the Civil War. The Civil War ended on 15th January 1970. So, Naya Dam by 15 days. Father Ferdinand. And he was born into the family of Ugoke Abonyi Ezako and Josephine Abonyi. Ndi Begama village, Numolo, Nidi. Unfortunately, this Father Ferdinand lost his father so early, but grew up under the tutelage of his brother, late Fabian Ubu. Before Ferdinand had already started his primary education at St. Patrick's Primary School in DOP, but before then, he had already started his primary school at St. Patrick's in DOP, but his uncle took him to Bauchi, where he eventually completed his primary school. And at the insistence of his benefactor, his uncle, and a brother, Mr. Godwin Honor, he was recalled home. And then he returned home. We banye commercial school. All grew for 2 years. Owe choputano nwere okpukpe ọzọ Chineke kpọrọ ya. Owe banye na Sacred Heart Seminary in Sude in 1986. I had the privilege of receiving him as a senior seminarian prefect. And we benefited a lot from his experiences during his days in commercial school. Only examination papers and a type, more any office work, we did push them to our brother Father Ferdinand. Chineke wenye aka ka ọ gụcha junior seminary in 1994. Ewe zigezie na Bigger Memorial Seminary Enugu. Ebe aka no we gụcha akwụkwọ nwe degrees in philosophy and theology. Eche Father na 2003. This our amiable brother Ferdinand had worked in some parishes as a curate at St. Martin de Paul Parish Oboleke and Christ the King Parish Adani. Ewenye Parish Enyeria, Nkiz na Holy Trinity Parish Ihaka. If you go to Ihaka, His footprints, they love him, especially for his humility. St. Paul's Parish Umuopu, Mechezgia na St. Francis Parish Mbuamon. Obeba bo ebonwu akebu Father Ferdinand Abonyi for the first time. Maka na ọ magị of diabetes akpagari. He nearly died there. Ano meshiri ike. Unu manu ka the very wise. Ọ na-abụ oge ụfọdụ the lay people na-ahụ transfers and the Father. Or they ha complain. But no. Who can will wisdom and ha marry the good for each and every priest. Ewe zigia na Ascension Parish ihakboka for recuperation and rehabilitation. Ebe aka onogide wedemma ụka in her wise again. We zipie oweje na St. James Parish okpo. Nocha ewe zigie na St. Patrick's Parish Amugwako. No na ahụ na ndị Amugwako na he take almost this line. Father Ferdinand Werubor, so the footprints of his predecessors, especially in Ehono Loka, and Arana Moguno na Gofma. Or Rugidego Noka, we rotate to a level. Obiar, where yon nani Father Bishop ka any date of dedication. And I was reliably informed, na Father Bishop Enyegi Eri, sometime in January 2026, ka delegate St. Patrick's Parish Amugwako. Una humano ke ya bore ya shiwedun. So, mana, anyị na-ekele Chukwu maka nwana anyị nwoke. We shall indeed miss him for his calmness, for his gentleness, and his highly generous spirit, especially in our Unum Presbyterium. Father was a priest of great faith, whose self-sacrificing disposition and availability to all who needed him is in the superlatives. As a serene priest with deep faith and trust in God, he never wished to bother anyone with his struggle and challenges. He rather decided to choose a stoic endurance of his faith. And on the 26th of August, 2025, the Lord called him to himself and opened wide the gates of heaven to welcome Father Ferdinand into the graceful company of the triumphant church. Makanwana nwoke Father Johnmartins. Father Johnmartins Chikani. Amụrụ on 11th November 1947. Nne nna ya bụ Abraham na Salom Ugwanye Chikani no Werezọba. And he began his journey to the priesthood in 1965 with his entry into St. John Cross Seminary in Nsukka, a formation that was interrupted by the Nigerian Civil War between 1966 and 1970. As a distinguished and fearless revolutionary whose transformational tendencies are innate, he quickly joined the Biafran army in defense of our people, after he had diligently sought and obtained permission from his then parish priest, Father Barrett, CSSP. Towards the end of the Civil War in precisely 1969, Father Johnmartins resigned from the Biafran army and returned home as a captain. Mgba, ka ọ nụrụ na ibe move to St. Peter Clave Okwala, Okpala n'Imo State. He went and rejoined them there, and he was admitted. Emeche we transfer that seminary again to Bigard Memorial Seminary in Enugu. Ebe Father Johnmartins no we gocha, nweta degrees in philosophy and in theology. Echiri Father 15th July 1979 at the present chapel of the Spiritual School of Philosophy Isienu. Father Johnmartins nyenwa bụ Father izizi ndị sienu niile nwere comprising a harmona niile ma egem ụlọ ọbalile ezimo imirikenu nya bụ the first priest anyị nwere n'ọba. His first posting was to Our Lady of Lourdes n'ime Eziowa. Ebe a ka ọ nọ wee rụọ assistant na aka Father Pascal Onunwa. Mgbe Father Pascal pụrụ, he was the parish priest only for 6 months before a transfer to Holy Cross Umulokpa. Only one day when na-ekwu, or seen that he went to Umulokpa and carried enough cross for himself. Maka n'ebe a ka ọ nọ wee banyezi na Anambra State Ministry of Education. He was appointed the supervising principal of schools under the religious department. And it was working in this department, Ministry of Education, that Reverend Father Dr. Johnmartins Chikani built a formidable experience and management in education and economy. That he had the opportunity of feeling the pulse of the students and the teaching staff of post-primary schools in the course of his interaction with them as the chief supervising principal for Nsukka zone. In 1991, Father Chikani was appointed the principal of the popular St. Theresa's College in Nsukka, where his impact reverberated on arrival. He quickly employed his intellectual prowess and administrative sagacity that became the predisposing factor for his successful transformation of St. Theresa's College in Nsukka to a more dignified and a more responsible environment for effective learning. Those who were at home with STC in those days before he took over knew that it was not an easy task. Okoman, the headmaster, it was like someone being hauled into the dens of lion. But as a distinguished soldier of Christ, an educationist, a psychologist and philosopher with incredible strength of the bull, Father Johnmartins bulldozed his way into STC, decapitating and demobilizing the dens and hearts of cultism that was already embedded in STC, which before he took over had defied all attempts and methods. We thank God immensely that the battle for survival was won, and his goal for transforming the untransformable into worthy vessels was achieved, though at great price. Before that mag, Nendo Shijerbe Johnmartins Uborebo. One was the last one was St. Theresa, Bishop Shanahan Hospital. Father Robert Ugogo Neba. When the miscreants, the robbers invaded their house, Father Martins, Obe Chukumarge Oshi Jeme escape. Ejide Father Robert. Were piece loti eba. Were dagati and azuna asiangwa. No bugukwe ebono. They wanted to shoot him. But eventually one of them will say, no more when he had this young man made. Say happier. Call Naba. Otu akode, ma local government chairman, all of them were house boys to Father Johnmartins, and they had a lot of threats because of his commitment to do what he thought was right. The watchword during his long tenure in STC was discipline and high moral standard. First for himself, then the staff and the students. Father Johnmartins, gana aburu, no bunu nishe karaka ne jogun tarpokpo. Anaga adage jobu, anaga ebuni kpashwara. Johnmartins na agbali 3:30 n'ụtụtụ. O wote ka na 4. No je kama money mass. Ndube humano ogbali na arigide house chores arigida onye obna na ari ya nike. O wote ka na 5 o'clock dot. Na Father Johnmartins eri his breakfast. Bali Jigide School, around 6 o'clock, 6:30 no Bido morning assembly. It was a virtue because he was so consistent and so religious about it. On when Bob Laban ebe, Urioma Siaka and Ibule, Hamgen Kikwimura. Father Johnmartins broke the jinx of indolence in STC, instilled academic consciousness that infected and affected the entire students' environment. He was able to inform the majority of his students who appreciated the fact that an academic messiah had arrived. Those who were classed as useful idiots were either shown the way or they expelled themselves before the sword of Damocles descended on them. We are grateful to God that Father Johnmartins Chikani, the soldier, the distinguished disciplinarian, the administrative wizard, and the super principal was able to form men among men who today belong to the who is who in Nigerian space, who are professionals in all spheres of life. The super headmaster was later transferred to St. Patrick's College, Oboleke, where he continued with his natural instinct of transforming, informing, and forming individuals and institutions. He successfully achieved his goals with massive credits in spite of his age and failing help after a home accident in which he fell down and sustained terrible health challenges. Honestly, we have lost great priests in Nsukka diocese. We have lost brilliant and wise and inspiring principal, an impeccable and charismatic leader, a philosopher and a good man with incredible passion for the good of all humanity. He was a man whose time consciousness is unparalleled, an excellent teacher and a farmer who knew and taught priests the importance of self-reliance and insisted that priests should never turn to beggars in order to sustain themselves. On the 15th of July, 2023, he was installed the Onyish of Umonuma village in Owerri Zoba. And on the 12th day of August, 2025, we lost him in this earthly existence to enrich the throngs of saints who worship God day and night. It pains us to lose these our dear colleagues in these seemingly unending chains. But like I said, and like Horatio Spafford said, it is well with our souls. May the souls of our dear brothers and fathers, Johnmartins, Chikani, and Ferdinand, Abonyi, and the souls of all the faithful departed, through the mercy of the Lord, rest in peace.